Hi everyone, today we're going to learn how to make this card holder, and it comes in a DIY kit with everything or almost everything that you need. Okay, so continue watching and you'll learn how to make this. Okay, inside the kit you'll find these. You'll have 3 pieces of leather, the front, the middle cut slot and the back piece. Then you will also find a little packet like this with all the things you need, and a little container with the gum from the brand Tokenol. Okay, and you'll need these items to stitch your card holder. Let's open the ziplock and see what we have inside. So inside we have this little packet which I have included double-sided tape. Okay, and this double-sided tape is really thin. It's only 2 mm thin, and it'll be perfect for joining the edges. If you have contact adhesive at home, you may also use this instead of the double-sided tape. Okay, so that's one item down. We also have 2 needles, and you will need both of these, and later on in the video I'll show you how to thread out the needles. You will need sandpaper, and this is for the last step, which is in the burnishing process. And you will also find threads, and each of these threads are labeled for the different stages of sewing. And like for example this one, the thread for the inner cut slot, the base of the inner cut slot, this is the thread that you'll be using first, and it's the shortest of all the threads. And then the second one that you will need to use is to sewing around the card holder. And I've also included extra thread just in case there's a need for it. Okay, so I'm going to also tell you what are the other items that you will need that have not been included. You will need a pair of scissors. Okay, you will also need a lighter of some sort, okay, or something to light tea light so that you can burn the thread to seal off the stitching, and also a wooden disposable chopstick. I'll introduce why we will need this later, and this can be requested when you are actually getting the kit. If you do not live in a place with Chinese takeout and wooden disposable chopsticks are not easy to find, then just drop me a note. Okay, before we even do any stitching, there are 2 edges that we will need to burnish. Okay, because the minute we stitch these down to the back, it's going to be very hard to get into these edges to burnish it. Okay, the other edges will only be done right at the end, okay, after all the stitching. So let's get started on burnishing the edges. Okay, I will firstly take out the gum. Well, what this gum does is actually it fuses the fibers. Okay, as you can see, there are a lot of fibers along the edge of the leather that has been cut, and this gum actually fuses the fibers and allows a very nice, smooth and glossy finish. Okay, so what we need to do is to apply some of the gum thinly along the edge that we want to burnish, and then we will use the wooden chopstick, and then we'll just stroke along the edge. Okay, and we'll do this a few times until it's really nice and smooth. At this stage, if you find that the fibers are sticking out, you can actually use a pair of scissors to trim them. If you find that the fibers are not they're not flat, You can also use the sandpaper to sand along the edge. Okay, then continue this process for at least 10 to 20 times on this edge. Okay, because this is a single edge, it's not like joined with another piece of leather. It's actually easier to burnish and requires lesser times of burnishing. Later on, when you see how I burnish the end, the final edges, you will find that you'll need a lot more effort to do a perfect job on that. Okay, so after burnishing this edge, I will work on this one. Okay, and you can continue what I've done here on this piece as well. I will remove the staple here so I can get hold of the first piece of thread that I need to use. Okay, to threadle the needle, I will need to find the end of the thread. Okay, by the way, this thread was actually cut to a certain length. And how do I decide on the length? If I have the whole reel of thread, I would have taken 4 times the length of the part that I'm going to sew. So since I'm going to stitch only this part, I was supposed to use 4 times the length, but you will find that your thread is actually more than 4 times the length. Okay, that's to make sure that if you do any mistakes and you need to trim and cut, you will still have some left over. Okay, so let's go down to the threading of the needle. Okay, you put the thread, one end of the thread through the needle first. Okay, bring it about 2 inches down. Okay, or maybe 3 inches down. Okay, but you will need to try and pierce through the thread. Okay, leaving about 2 inches from the end. And when I say pierce through the thread, I mean to prick through the thread itself, as you can see. And I'll pull the needle through like this. And I'll pull the end, that extra thread, over the needle, and this actually locks it in place. So even if you're even while you're sewing, and if let's say the needle drops vertically downwards, okay, you will not actually lose your needle. Okay, now for the other end. Okay, I'll take the other end. So this one end has been threaded. Okay, I'm going to use the other end and I'm going to threadle through the needle. I'm doing the same thing. Okay, I'm going to pull it through, maybe about 3 inches plus, but I'm going to prick and go through the thread about 2 inches from the end of the thread, and then I'm going to bring this end through and pull it over and lock this in place. Okay, so once your needle is threaded for the first step of stitching, I'll show you how to keep this in place first. So I'm going to put the needles aside. Okay, so stitching step 1 is to stitch this inner cut slot down to the back piece. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape, using my double-sided tape. I'm going to tape a layer that is as close to this edge as possible, okay, so that I can actually paste it down before I stitch. Okay, so I'm going to turn my piece of leather upside down or to the wrong side, and then using the little roll of tape, okay, I'm going to try and find the start of it. Okay, this double-sided tape is very, very thin. Okay, I didn't want a very thick tape as it would actually block the stitching holes. So I'm going to tape really close. Okay, Okay, I'm going to zoom in. And then using a pair of scissors, okay, I'm going to snip off okay, so let me zoom back out and bring this up to you. Okay, so as you can see, the double-sided tape is really close. Okay, at this point in time, I'm not going to tear off the double-sided tape yet. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to align these stitching holes with the back piece. Okay, so do take note that the back piece, the correct side should be facing below. So you should be working with the wrong side facing up. Okay, and this is so that when you place your card holder, okay, and you sew it up, when you turn to the back, you will actually see the proper side of the leather. If you taped it this way, okay, you will see that from the front it looks really nice, but once you put in the card, you actually can't see this surface anymore, and that's the reason why this should be done the other way around. Okay, I'll show you the end product later. Okay, so as I mentioned, the double-sided tape has been secured. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and find the holes and align them. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to place one needle through the first hole over here, and then I'm going to find the first hole on the back. Okay, and this first hole is the hole that is here, not the edge. Okay, the inner first hole. Okay, and once I've placed that in, put my needle in place, okay, this is a temporary thing. I use the term acupuncture because we always, in Chinese medicine, they use acupuncture. They put needles into the skin. Okay, and what I'm doing is I'm actually performing acupuncture on my leather, and the purpose is to align such that my stitching holes are actually aligned on both sides. Okay, and once I've done that, I'm going to hold the leather in place. Okay, I'm going to take out one of the needles, and now I will remove the double-sided tape here. Okay, I'll remove the other layer, peel it all off, and I'll press this down. I'll remove the needle. Okay, as I mentioned, the needle was there only temporary to make sure that my stitching holes are aligned on both sides. Okay, and now that I have pressed this in place, I'm going to start stitching soon. Now for the stitching of the inner card slot. Okay, we're going to start with this end. Okay, and as you can see, I've actually drawn the stitching marks because I want to show you what's the best way to stitch without using the stitching pony, which is what many of the professionals use when they do stitching. But since this is a DIY kit, you may not have the stitching pony at home, so let's do some stitching just by hand. Okay, so we have two needles, and earlier on in the video I've already shown you how to thread all the needles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the needle through, and I'm going to hold both needles, and I'm going to pull the thread until it's halfway through, because we are going to stitch basically in and out this way, and the other thread going the opposite direction. Okay, so the thread that's on top will be the thread that goes down. Okay, so now that we are, okay, as I mentioned, we are halfway, as in the threads should be of the same length. I'm just going to use my finger to steady and hold this in place so that when I pull this thread, it doesn't go an extra distance through the next hole. Okay, so from the first hole, we're going to put and poke through to the next hole. Okay, and I'm going to pull through, and as you can see the stitch actually in the front. At the present moment, the back, there's no stitch yet. Okay, so I hope you'll follow the technique that I use. Okay, so what I usually do is I will place the thread down, and I will use the thread that came through the first hole, and I will slide it through the top of the stitch hole. Okay, so as you can see here, I've drawn, these are the stitches in the leather itself, and what I'm aiming to do with my thread is to stitch across like this. And the stitch that the thread that comes out from the second hole towards the front, this needle, okay, is actually going to come out through here, this part of the stitch hole, and I'm going to put it and poke it through to the bottom end of the next hole, the third hole. Okay, so I'm going to show it to you. Okay, I will pull this through and tug on both ends to make sure it's secure. At this point in time, I will just check that my threads are still the same length on both sides. And once I do it for this step, subsequently, they should be the same length all the time. Okay, so as I mentioned, when I go into the third hole, I'm going to actually poke into the bottom part of the slant of the next hole. Okay, and when I pull this through, this is going to give me the slant that I want, okay, which is slanting towards the right. Okay, and then I'm going to hold this down like this, and with the back thread and needle, I'm going to pierce it through the top slant, which will bring through to the left this part of the third hole. Okay, and I'm going to stitch slanted again. So this third hole, I'll bring it down, and then the back thread upwards. Okay, and I will make sure when I stitch, I'll make sure that the stitches are tight on both sides every time both threads have gone through. Okay, this is to prevent any puffing up or loose threads, which would create a lot of problems if you find out that you didn't tighten it much later in the row. Okay, so make sure you pull both ends. And what we're going to do is we're going to continue towards the end, and when you reach near the second last stitch, I will come back and show you how to end the stitching. Okay, now I've already finished the stitching, and I think you should have also right towards the end. So we are left with only one more hole to go. Okay, and as you know, this is the inner side of the card holder. This side will actually be covered by the front card holder piece. So if we want to end off any stitching, it should be on this side rather than on the outside of the card holder. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to just bring the thread in through this side. Okay, so I'm going to bring the last stitch instead of going down. Okay, actually you could go down, but then you will have double stitch at the end. So I'm just going to bring it back up from the back. Okay, so I actually I have the whole row of a single stitch all the way. And once you reach up here, because it's on the inside, I'll just choose to tie a knot. Okay, so this is one of the ways of actually ending. But usually we will only end this way if the stitch will be totally hidden. Okay, and in this case the stitch is going to be totally hidden, so therefore I will not have any issues with ugly ending being seen. Okay, so I choose to just snip it with my thread scissors. You could use any scissors, just normal pair of scissors will do as well. Okay, and the other thing that you need that is not in the kit is a lighter. Okay, I'm very scared of the short lighters, so I have one that has an extra nozzle. Okay, so that way that the flame is further away from me. So what I'll need to do now is to light and make these two ends melt, and as they melt they actually become shorter, and I'll just press it down, and that's how we end it. And I'm ending it this way because it, as I mentioned earlier, it will be hidden. Okay, later on when we end the outer bit, I will show you another way to end it. Okay. Okay, now that we have finished stitching this inner layer, we are going to put our double-sided tape around the edges so that we can put this front piece together and then stitch it up. Okay, so I would like you to just take a close look at this. Okay, there is actually one more stitching hole here which comes out at the end after the cut slot, the inner cut slot. Okay, so this stitching hole is there so that when you double up this stitch, okay, come backwards and you stitch this stitch, the cut holder will not fall apart easily. All right, so just take note that when we are putting the tape, okay, you will not tape all the way to the end. You will only start placing the tape roughly where this flap ends. Okay, so I'm going to actually start with the tape. I will tape from here to somewhere around here and then make a snip, and then I'll continue this edge and then around this end until again this part. Okay, I will not go beyond that, if not you will see the tape sticking out and that won't be nice. I'll show it, I'll zoom in and show you one edge, and then I will fast forward the video until the end. Okay, so somewhere around here, that will be the start of my tape. Now as you can see, I'm reaching towards the end there, so I'm going to make a snip such that it doesn't cross over. Okay, see, it'll be nice and neat. And here as well. Show you the last step before we stitch this outer layer, which is actually to start peeling off the tape. Okay, remember when you tape it all up, leave the tape, the other side of the double-sided tape there, and once you're ready to paste them all down, then you start to peel. Okay, so I'm gonna peel off this edge first. Okay, and align this. Yeah, make sure that my holes match up. Okay, to make it easy, I'm going to peel out this corner and this side, or at least part of this side. Okay. I will then align the second piece here, making sure that the edge here is aligned. Now the holes of this, the pieces have been made such that the stitching holes are totally aligned. So what I like to do is actually to pierce through one of the corner stitches, and if it goes through easily, you can just continue to press the parts down. Okay. Then I will slowly peel off the edge, match the edge, and press it down. Okay, peel off the rest of the double-sided tape. Okay, as we cannot send contact cement via mail, or at least I prefer not to, I've chosen the option of double-sided tape. Okay, so press neatly. Make sure that the ends are aligned, because later on we're going to do what we call burnishing, which is to smoothen up the ends. So all this should be done, and everything should be nice and flush. And you have the card holder ready to be stitched. Okay, let's get ready to stitch the outer sides of the card holder. Now, just now after stitching the inner card slot, you should have snipped off the threads to burn, and they should have quite a long tail. Okay, now in order to remove this, if you're having a hard time removing it from the needle, actually what you do is you tug on the shorter end. Okay, just gently tug on it and it will actually slide out. Okay, it will slide out of the needle. So first it unloops itself. Okay, just now we made a loop to tie the string dead. So this is the unlooping. So once you unloop this, you can actually pull through the thread and then slide it out of the needle. Okay, and these pieces of thread, you can actually throw them. Okay, you can actually throw them because there's extra in case you need. So now I'm going to take out the thread that was labeled for sewing around the card holder. This is what I mean for sewing the 3 sides. Okay, so I'm just going to tear open this and remove the thread. Okay, similar to what we did earlier, we are going to threadle the needle on both ends. Okay, so we will need 2 needles again. Okay, let me do a recap so that you don't have to rewind the video. Okay, pull through and then pierce through the thread about 2 inches or so from the end. Okay, this needle is actually needle for sewing leather is actually blunt. So even if you poke yourself like this, you will actually not bleed unless you poke really hard, but you don't really need to do that. Okay, so I've threaded one end. Okay, just let me give you a tip in case you are having a hard time. I teach this method to my son, who also does leather work, and he's only a teenager. So if you are having difficulty piercing this through and you don't dare to do it like this, okay, what you could do is to place it on either a cutting board or a surface where like you have a padding, and you can actually poke the needle through the thread like this. Okay, just poke it, punch it through, and then pull the original, the long thread through, and then towards the end pull the short thread over the eye, and you have locked it in place. Okay, So using the needle and piercing it on a surface like this, okay, might help also. Okay, now that we have both needles threaded and they are actually in a loop, when I stitch leather, I always like to hold it such that I have the leather held in my left hand, and then I will use my right hand to do most of the stitching. That's because I'm right-handed. Okay. Another thing that I need you to take note of is this, because we have two flaps here. So in order to secure these flaps, I'm actually going to double stitch this area. So what I want you to do before you start is to count the number of stitch holes. Okay, there's actually one stitch hole here, okay, which cannot be seen from the front so easily. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we're going to start with the sixth stitch hole, and we're going to pierce the needle through, and then we're going to bring the needle and pull it such that the threads are the same distance. What we're actually going to do is to stitch backwards, reach the end, then forward, so there'll be a double stitch all the way back to here, and then we're going to go down the row towards the left. Okay, come down this side, stitch right to the end, and then go back another 5 stitches to the 6th hole, and then we're going to end at the back. Okay, so as you can see, earlier on stitching the inside, I've taught you this method. So what we're going to do now is I counted 6 stitch holes, which means that this, okay, counting the stitch holes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I've asked you to pierce your thread through this last, the 6th stitch hole. Our thread is now coming through here, and we're going to go backwards into the 5th stitch hole. Okay, and then after that, from the back, from here, come forward. So we're going to move forward until we get to the 1st stitch hole, and then we're going to move in the opposite direction. Okay, so I'm going to hold this side, I'm going to pierce through to the back. Okay, so remember, I'm doing the first 5 back stitches now. Now I'll start to head back in the direction that we are going, okay, that we are supposed to be stitching. So coming out from the 1st stitching hole, I will just go over the threads that I have sewn so far, okay, trying to keep to the same direction and slant. Okay, so I'll go over, if it's slanting, if the thread is slanting in this direction, I will pierce down to the lower end of the stitch hole, and then the stitch coming from the back, I'll bring it up through the top end of the higher end of the stitch hole, and then I'll pull tight. Okay, So you can actually adjust the stitches to make sure that the threads, they overlap or they sit next to each other nicely, like this. Okay, you can adjust it before you go on to the next stitch. So again, let me reiterate, we're doing the back stitches here so that we can secure the front two flaps down, so that even when you put in and take out your cuts frequently, it will not cause this stitch hole to tear easily. Okay, and from here I will just continue stitching this same method all the way until I reach the last stitch, and then what I'll do is I will come back and all the way to the 6th stitch hole, and then I'll end it, and I'll show it to you later in the video when I reach this portion. Okay, I'm now at the 6th hole at the end, so just continue sewing as you have all the way to this last stitch. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is to go back until the 6th stitch. Okay, so going backwards, I can still hold the leather in this same direction, or you could turn it around, whichever that you feel more comfortable. Okay, but just follow the slant of the stitches. Like for example, this one is coming out through this hole, so follow the slant of this stitch. Okay, so we're doing, that was 1. 5 stitch holes means we have 6 stitch holes means there are 5 stitches that you need to do. 2, 3, okay, 4. Okay, so these are we have done 4 complete back stitches. Okay, and we have actually secured the first flap already. Okay, but in order to have 5 stitch holes, 5 stitches on the front to mirror the 5 stitches on the other side. Okay, for the last stitch, I'm just going from the front into the 6th stitch hole, and this time we're going to end differently. We're not going to tie any knots. What we're going to do is to pull the threads tight, make sure all the threads are tight, and then all we're going to do is make a snip and then burn it. Okay, so we're going to snip close to the edge. Okay, and then we're going to take the lighter and we're going to burn the threads down and press it in. Usually a burnishing tool is used. Burnishing tools look like this. They're usually made of wood. This is made of wood also, but it's really worn out already because I've been using it for a long time. This is originally natural wood, but after all the burnishing, it's been stained. You just need actually a hard and smooth surface. So what I have suggested and have used is actually a wooden chopstick, and this is a disposable chopstick that come along with those takeouts. Okay, so what you can do is you can use a little cotton and dab a bit of the Tokinol, or you could just use your hand, just a little. And to apply along the edge, I'm actually just going to dab a few drops and then gently smear it. Okay, you might want to have a piece of tissue on hand so that you can clean off the excess, and try not to smear too much of it on the leather surface itself. Okay, and what we're going to do after we smear some on is to actually gently rub along the surface in a fast motion. Okay, the burnishing tool, I'm going to show it to you, actually has these grooves, okay, curved grooves. So when we burnish with the actual tool, it allows us to curve the edges. But what you could do with your chopstick is just to turn by the side, turn it on its side a little, and just burnish the edges like this. You're basically doing the same thing. And this burnishing process actually takes quite a while if you want to get it to a very smooth and glossy finish. At the same time, different leathers also burnish differently. Chrome tan leathers cannot be burnished at all. This is veg tan leather. So veg tan leather can be burnished. And certain leathers burnish very, very nicely, while others maybe not as well, depending on the quality of the leather as well. So along with this polishing phase, you can also use sandpaper. This is 1,000. The sandpaper is the 1,000, the number, and you actually use it to smoothen the edge before applying another round. And burnishing again. So this process actually can take pretty long. You might have to do the sanding and dabbing and polishing for at least 40 to 50 times before you actually get the edge all nice and smooth. So this is actually an optional step, and it allows the finished product to look a little better. You can continue this process until you're satisfied with the edge. Okay, I've actually burnished the other edges already, and I wouldn't consider this as finished, but they are much better than the raw edge that was originally there before we burnished it at all. Okay, I hope you like doing this project, and that you'll join me again on another DIY project soon.